When I was in high school, there was one boy in my class who was very, very strange looking. Most of the other kids were afraid of him, and everybody kept out of his way. He always kept to himself and never spoke to anyone. His name was Craig, but we gave him the nickname Crazy Eyes. He had the strangest eyes you had ever seen. They were large, round, bugged out, and disturbing. They didn't look human. It was as if they belonged to some sort of exotic reptile, like a chameleon or a lizard. During class, he remained completely silent, never asking or answering any questions. I got the impression that the teachers were scared of him as well. All he did was stare at everyone with his huge, bugged out eyes, creeping them all out with that unsettling gaze of his. One Monday morning we had a media class. The teacher split us up into groups and gave us the task of making a short film. Due to the luck of the draw, Craig was assigned to our group. While we gathered around and discussed ideas, he kept his mouth tightly shut and just stared at us all with his big, bulbous eyes. We eventually came up with an idea for a slasher movie. The plot involved a crazed killer who goes around the school stabbing people. Craig was so odd-looking that we unanimously decided that he should play the killer. His crazy eyes made him the obvious choice. As it turned out, the movie was a great big success. We managed to create a 5-minute film that looked almost as professional as a Hollywood horror flick. Surprisingly, Craig did a great job in his role as the killer. We shot hours of footage of him stalking the school grounds, running from tree to tree. He was armed with a fake knife that had a retractable blade. Then we filmed him stabbing a bunch of kids who were playing the victims. They were soaked from head to toe with fake blood. Taking part in the movie, Craig really seemed to come out of his shell. He took to acting like fish to water. When filming was complete, we all noticed a big change in his personality. Somehow it boosted his confidence, and although he still didn't talk very much, he held his head up high and seemed more sure of himself. On Friday, when we screened the film for the entire class, they loved it and started chanting, "Craig, Craig, Craig." That day, he was the most popular kid in the class and seemed to revel in the attention. However, when Monday morning arrived, Crazy Eyes Craig was nowhere to be seen. He didn't show up for school and nobody seemed to know where he was. For the rest of the week, he was absent from school. That weekend, I was at home working on an assignment for school. I overheard a report on the news about an attempted murder that had happened in our town. Shocked, I glanced up from my work, and when I set eyes on the picture they were showing on the TV screen, a chill ran down my spine. It was Craig. His humongous, crazy eyes stared at me from the TV screen as the news reporter continued with the story. Apparently, he had been stalking his next-door neighbor. She was a 16-year-old girl named Leanne. She, her younger sister, and her mother had been home alone while her father was away on business. The two girls stayed up late watching a horror movie on TV. It was A Nightmare on Elm Street. During the movie, they started to notice something strange. They opened up a box of cereal and took 2 bowls into the living room to eat, but when Leanne went back to the kitchen, she found that the box was empty. When the movie finished, the girls went upstairs to get ready for bed. Leanne opened her bedroom closet and found Craig standing there, holding a hatchet. He was dressed in her mother's clothes and had makeup smeared all over his face. He told her to be quiet and tied her up. Then he fetched her mother and her sister and marched them to the back room. He tied up them as well and left all 3 laying on the floor. He told them that he was going to kill them and that he'd be right back, so they better start praying. The police said he went downstairs to ransack the house and steal valuables. While he was gone, the youngest girl managed to wiggle free of her bonds. She jumped out the window and ran to a nearby house to raise the alarm. Within minutes, the police were breaking down the front door. They ran up the stairs with their guns drawn and found Leanne and her mother lying hogtied on the bedroom floor, but there was no sign of Crazy Eyes Craig. The police freed the mother and daughter before conducting a search of the entire house. They combed the place from top to bottom, but couldn't find any traces of Craig. It was as if he had vanished into the night. In fact, nobody had any idea where Craig was, and while he was still at large, no one in the town could rest easy. The incident was a huge shock for our small town. Before that, it had been a peaceful, idyllic little place. Nobody ever locked their doors. That night I watched my father screwing 2 sturdy deadbolts onto our front and back doors. On Monday morning, it was the talk of the school. None of the kids could believe what had happened, and everyone was terrified. At the back of the school building, there was a huge forest, and rumors spread among the kids that Craig was hiding out in the woods, laying in wait for more victims. Some kids were even too scared to show up for class. Leanne and her family stayed with relatives for a few days to get away from the house. In all that time, law enforcement combed the woods and searched house to house, but nobody could find the crazy-eyed maniac. Eventually, Leanne and her family had to go home. As soon as they pulled into their driveway, they saw something that terrified them. Craig was standing at the top of an upstairs window, gazing out at them with a smirk on his face. The girl's father started yelling. The neighbors came running over. The police were called, and within minutes they were surrounding the house. A SWAT team were readying themselves beside a van, loading their weapons and studying the layout of the house. They searched the house from top to bottom, but they didn't find Craig anywhere. Instead, they were confronted by a disturbing scene. Pennies were glued to the ceiling, and there was strange writing all over the walls. All of their clothes had been cut into ribbons, and the entire contents of the kitchen fridge was neatly arranged on the living room floor, and the whole place reeked of urine and feces. The police conducted another thorough search of the house, but it turned up nothing. Just when they were about to give up and go home, one of the cops mentioned that he thought he heard a faint noise when he was in the basement. Sounded like it was coming from behind the washing machine. The SWAT team immediately recognized and descended cautiously into the basement. With their guns drawn, they pulled the washing machine away from the wall, and curled up in a hole behind it, they found Craig. As it turned out, the truth was much more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Leanne and her family were horrified. For 2 whole years, Craig had been living in their walls. They found peepholes everywhere. While Leanne and her family had been sitting at home, watching TV, eating dinner, taking showers, getting dressed, going to the washroom, and sleeping peacefully in their beds, Craig had been there the entire time, silently watching them with his crazy, bugged-out eyes. I was awoken by a loud thumping sound. Startled, I sat up in my bed, but I could see nothing in the darkness of my room. No odd shapes. Thinking it was my imagination, I went back to sleep. But a few minutes later, the low thumping happened again. I opened my eyes and glanced at the clock next to my nightstand, and it read midnight. Midnight, the witching hour. I snorted at the silly saying. I didn't believe in such nonsense. I believed the thumping was probably an animal on the roof. All sorts of night animals tend to get up there, especially at this hour. The sound had to be coming from above, and just sounds like it's in my room. I was about to close my eyes again, but suddenly the thumping happened again, louder. Okay, so now I'm a little creeped out. I never heard something so loud before. I shut my eyes tight and tried to fall back asleep. I wish my parents were home, but they left earlier to visit my sick grandmother, and my older brother is spending the night with his girlfriend. I almost wished Ashley was here. She's this annoying airhead from my school. Can't stand her snobby attitude, and it sucked that she lived right next door. At the moment, though, I started wishing even she was here with me. Thump. Oh God. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to ignore the sound. It had to be my imagination. Yep, just imagining it. I shouldn't have read so many creepypasta stories before falling asleep. Creepy stories from this site always give me nightmares. An hour passed. No more thumping. Good. Starting to feel sleepy again. As I start to doze off, I hear the whisper, "I have come for you." My eyes shot open. "I will feast on your soft flesh." I started to cry. That voice was real. There was something in the room with me. "I will enjoy the sound of your screams while I slowly peel off your skin." I didn't want to look, but I felt like I had to. My eyes tried to locate the smooth, deep voice, the voice that was threatening horrid things. I quickly spotted it. He was at the foot of my bed. Even in the darkness, I could see how tall he was, and very pale. His large black eyes glared down at me with such intense hatred. Why was he angry at me? I don't understand, but did I even want to? "Tonight, Ashley, you will die," he whispered angrily. I was about to scream, but then I realized something. Did he just say Ashley? I'm not Ashley," I managed to shout at the pale man. "You're not?" asked the pale man with a puzzled expression. No, my name's Erica. Ashley lives in the house next door," I explained nervously. The pale man stared at me for a moment, and then he pulled out a piece of paper from a pocket and studied it. With a look of annoyance, he stuffed the paper back in his pocket and smiled at me. Oh God, his smile. His mouth was too wide, and his teeth were sharp, maybe even razor sharp. "My deepest apologies. I was given the wrong information. Sorry to have disturbed your rest," he said politely, and then I watched stunned as he crawled out of my bedroom window. "Oh," he popped his head back inside and grinned at me with a large, scary grin. "I know this is rather strange, coming from me, but would you like to maybe catch a movie one of these days, or dinner, perhaps?" "Well, I'm kind of already seeing someone," I said. "Oh, pity. Well, have a good night," he said as he had poked back out. I stood frozen for a bit. I couldn't believe what just happened. Nobody would believe me. Well, it was gone now, whatever hell he was. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. I was brave enough to finally move and went to close my window and lock it securely. As I settled into sleep, I realized something. It was going to get airhead Ashley. I was about to dart out of bed, but stopped. She was pretty nasty to everybody. Not like she was somebody I cared for, too. Oh well, I thought as I snuggled back into my warm blankets and went back to sleep. There were two 15-year-old girls named Alice and Sarah who had been best friends since early childhood. They lived in the same neighborhood, attended the same school, and went to the same classes. In short, they were inseparable. However, they were very different characters. When Alice was cheerful and outgoing, Sarah was very shy and quiet. One day, Sarah and Alice were talking about their friendship. "Do you think we'll be best friends forever?" asked Alice. "I think so," replied Sarah. "Why wouldn't we?" "I don't know," said Alice. "Sometimes when people get older, they grow apart." "I have an idea," said Sarah. "Let's take a blood oath." "A what?" asked Alice, surprised. "A blood oath," said Sarah. "Look, we both have to swear that we'll be best friends forever. If we ever lose touch, we both swear that we will do everything we can to make sure we will be together forever." "That's nonsense, Sarah," said Alice. "We won't lose touch. We'll always be together." But Sarah continued to insist, and with a mixture of amazement and amusement, Alice finally agreed to the proposal. Sarah found 2 needles and handed one to Alice. The girls took a piece of paper and wrote "Best Friends Forever" on the top, and then signed their names at the bottom. They lit a candle and heated the tips of the 2 needles in the flame. Taking their needles, both girls pricked their index fingers, and each smeared a drop of blood next to their signature. Their blood oath was now sealed. As the years passed, the girls grew up and left school. Alice went away to college in another city, while Sarah stayed in their hometown and got a job in a local store. Both of them had boyfriends and fell in love. The girls still kept in touch by phone, calling each other at least once a week. When Alice had completed her law degree, she got a good job and decided that it was time to get married. The couple bought a house and settled down. A few years later, they had a beautiful baby boy. Alice was so busy with her family that she rarely found time to call Sarah. It wasn't long before the phone call stopped completely and the friends lost touch with each other. Although Alice would sometimes still think about her best friend from her youth, she never took the trouble to pick up the phone and call her. In the end, life had led the 2 women down different paths, and they had not seen each other since they left school. One night, Alice had a horrible nightmare. She was driving along an endless highway when suddenly a truck in front of her began to swerve into her lane. The truck skidded and then collided with her car. She woke up suddenly, soaked in sweat. Just as she was trying to calm herself down, she heard her front doorbell ringing. She glanced at the clock by her bedside and realized it was after 3 a.m. Her husband was fast asleep on the other side of the bed. At that moment, the doorbell rang again, insistently. Wondering who could be coming to visit at that time of night, Alice got up, threw on her nightgown, and went downstairs. When she opened the front door, she was shocked to see a woman standing on the porch. The woman was terribly pale, extremely haggard, and had a huge bleeding wound on her forehead. Although she had changed a lot, Alice recognized her immediately. It was her old friend Sarah. "Oh my God, Sarah, what happened?" she cried. Sarah just stared at her. "Come in, out of the rain," said Alice. "Are you hurt?" Sarah didn't move from where she was. "What's wrong, Sarah?" pleaded Alice. "Long time no see, Alice," hissed Sarah. "I've come to fulfill my promise. I've come to tell you I died." Alice was speechless. Sarah held up her hand and pointed at Alice with her index finger. Her finger was dripping blood. "Life has separated us," Sarah continued, "but we will be together in death. I'll be waiting." Alice then fainted and collapsed on the ground. The next morning, when Alice woke up, she found that she was laying in bed next to her husband. She rubbed her eyes and wondered if the events of last night had all been just a bad dream. At breakfast, she turned on the television, and what she saw chilled her to the bone. The local newscaster was saying that the night before, right around 3 a.m., there had been a fatal traffic accident. A truck had collided with a car on the highway. The driver of the car had been killed on impact. The driver of the car was a woman named Sarah. From that moment on, Alice's life became a living hell. She barely ate a thing. She forgot to pick up her child from school, and when she went to work, she couldn't concentrate on anything. Every night, she had the same terrible dream. She would awake to the sound of the front doorbell ringing. She would open the door and find Sarah standing there, her bloody index finger pointing straight at Alice. Each time, Sarah would say the same thing. "I'll be waiting." Each morning, Alice awoke in a cold sweat. She looked down at her bed sheets, and they would be streaked with blood. She felt an excruciating pain in her finger, and when she looked, her finger was covered in blood. Her husband did not understand what was happening. He took his wife to see a doctor and a psychiatrist, but neither of them could find any explanation. Alice's condition only grew worse, and in her nightmares she began seeing Sarah standing at her bedside, pointing with her bleeding finger. One night, the husband was awakened by a dreadful noise. It was the sound of breaking glass. He ran out to the bathroom and discovered that the window was broken. Peering outside, he saw Alice lying on the sidewalk, her limbs askew. The horrified man rushed downstairs and out the front door. There was a pool of blood around his wife's head. Beside her on the pavement, someone had written in her blood, "Friends forever." If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.